All right, so we're diving into Alexander the Great today.
He's definitely a popular figure. He was more than just a king in his own time.
Yeah, he was considered like a god king, right? Divine figure.
Exactly.
How does somebody even reach that level of, I don't know, reverence?
Well, that's part of what we'll uncover.
I love it. All right, so basics first. Alexander's early life. King Philip II is your dad. Aristotle as your tutor. That's a lot to live up to.
Absolutely talk about pressure. But even as a kid, there were signs. You know the story of Bucephalus, right?
Oh, yeah, the wild horse.
The one no one could tame.
Yeah, terrified of its own shadow.
And Alexander, instead of forcing it, he figures that out.
Turns the horse towards the sun.
Problem solved. Gains this untamable horse as his own. What does that tell us about him, even then?
I mean, pretty smart kid, clearly. But there's got to be more to it than that, right?
It's almost too perfect. Like, did that really happen?
Right, it feels like a myth. But is there something to it?
I think so, even if it's exaggerated.
How so?
Well, the core idea. Confidence, sure.
But also,
Seeing solutions where others just saw problems. That horse, it wasn't just wild, it was scared.
okay.
Maybe Alexander sensed that. And that ability, that's something we see throughout his life.
Solving the unsolvable.
Exactly, on a much bigger scale.
Okay, so from taming wild horses to being seen as a god, how does that transition even happen?
It was gradual, of course, but the early military victories were huge, like the Battle of Granicus, facing the Persian Empire, outnumbered.
But Alexander, he leads the charge himself.
Yeah.
Right in the thick of it.
Oh, yeah, incredibly brave.
Must have been inspiring for his troops.
Oh, absolutely, cemented that bond between them. And remember, this is the ancient world. That line between human and divine, it was blurry.
So not totally unheard of for rulers to be deified.
Right, it wasn't unique to Alexander.
Okay, but still,
Yeah.
victories start piling up. He believes he's descended from gods.
This aura starts to build around him.
And then there's that whole Siwa Oasis thing, right? This desert temple dedicated to the god Amun.
Alexander goes there after conquering Egypt. Grueling journey. Nearly dies in the desert.
Guided by crows, I read.
Imagine that imagery. And when he gets to the oracle, she proclaims him the son of Amun. Talk about a divine endorsement.
So at this point, is he buying into it himself? Or is he manipulating the situation?
Good question. It's a question historians have debated forever.
But either way, he goes all in on the god king persona, even using that ram horn symbol.
Right, Amun symbol in his own imagery.
Okay, so his image is being crafted, but what about his actions? How does he back all this up?
We can look at the Siege of Tyre. This island city, pretty much impossible to attack.
Lasted months, right?
They had to build this massive causeway just to reach the island.
Incredible commitment. And engineering, too.
Totally.
Yeah.
For anyone watching, it must have seemed like he was bending reality. Definitely adds to the superhuman reputation.
So we've got a brilliant military strategist, a charismatic leader. The divine image is solidifying. What's next?
Well, now we get to the big one, the Battle of Gaugamela. This is the battle that brings down the Persian Empire, his biggest military achievement.
Up against King Darius III, and again, outnumbered.
Yeah, but pulls off a stunning victory. Those tactics, no one expected them. Now think about this, by age 25...
He's in control of, what, more territory than anyone in history?
Up to that point, yeah. It's hard to even grasp the scale of it.
From Greece all the way to Egypt, across Persia. Mind-blowing.
It really is.
But hold on, you said this is where things get interesting. He wins. It's huge. So what's the catch?
Well, it's called the mutiny at Opis.
Opis.
Yep, 324 BCE. So Alexander's been integrating Persian soldiers into his army.
Mixing them in with the Macedonians.
Even giving them the same training.
Wow. Bet that didn't go over well.
You'd be right. For a lot of those Macedonian veterans, I mean, they'd been with him since the beginning.
Through thick and thin, right?
Exactly. They saw themselves as the elite, the core of the army.
And now Alexander's bringing in these Persians, basically saying they're equals.
It felt like a betrayal to them.
Here's this. God King, unstoppable force, and his own men say no.
Right. First time he can't conquer something. And it's his own army's will. Makes you wonder what that did to him, you know, on the inside. It wasn't just some political disagreement.
It's personal.
Very much so. It was about their identity, you know, their loyalty, who was in, who was out.
And it almost tore his empire apart.
Almost. So what does Alexander do? You'd think maybe he'd crack down, get tough with them.
Force them back in line?
He could have, but instead he does something really clever.
What's that?
He gives a speech. One of the most famous speeches in history.
Oh, I've heard of this.
It's not just some, you know, rah-rah motivational speech.
More than that.
Oh, yeah, he carefully crafts it, appeals to their history together.
Their shared experience.
Right, all those battles, those hardships.
We've been through a lot together.
And he even talks about his own wounds, his scars, showing them he's not above them, he's with them.
Powerful stuff.
It really is. There's this one line, it always gets me. You who have fought alongside me, have you not also shared in my hardships?
Rhetorical question, right? But so effective.
Yeah, he's saying, look, we're in this together. We all sacrificed. We all benefited.
Let's move forward as one.
Exactly.
Did it work? Did they all just like suddenly agree with him?
Well, not immediately. There was resistance. Some guys were outright defiant. So then Alexander does something unexpected. He withdraws.
What, like he just walks out?
Yep. Leaves the assembly. Basically says, fine, you want to do this without me? Go ahead.
Wow. That's a power move.
It is. And get this, it worked. The soldiers, seeing their king, their leader, just walk away. They freaked out.
They realized they needed him.
Big time. All those victories, the wealth, the status they'd gained, it could all disappear without Alexander.
So what did they do?
They came crawling back, apologies, pledging their loyalty again.
So he's at the peak of his power, but things are already shifting.
Oh, yeah. And this is before the real tragedy hits.
What are you talking about?
The death of Hephaestion,
Yeah.
his closest friend. That's when things really start to unravel. This changes Alexander. That's when things really spiral. He never really recovers from that loss.
I mean, they were incredibly close. You can see it in how he mourns, orders divine honors for him.
Shows how deep their bond was. But it also,
It makes it worse, kind of.
it isolates him even more. Some say it even pushed him towards paranoia, erratic behavior.
So even as he's falling apart personally, that godlike image is still there.
Oh, it persists. And even after he dies in Babylon, the empire crumbles pretty quickly, but the legend lives on. All those stories about him being superhuman, divinely descended, they stick around.
Okay, so we've talked about ambition, military genius,
Mm-hmm.
personal struggles. But was Alexander ultimately a force for good or bad?
That's the question, isn't it? He accomplished amazing things, but at a huge cost. So much death, so much suffering. And in the end, that vision of a unified world, it failed.
And it's like the seeds of that failure were there from the start, right?
In a way, yeah. Like at Gaugamela, that big victory. It's also where his generals start to see him differently, maybe even as a rival to surpass.
Wow, history is rarely simple, is it?
Nope. And speaking of complex, this whole deification thing, it wasn't just him claiming it, was it? People actually believed it.
They saw those victories. And it had to be divine favor.
Right. And for others, it was probably safer to just agree with the God King.
Why make him angry? But I guess there was genuine awe too, right? Hero worship. He's charismatic, he's daring, he's seemingly unbeatable.
Makes sense that people would start to see him as more than human.
Imagine how that would play out today, though, with social media, the news cycle.
Alexander with a Twitter account. That's a scary thought.
Okay, before we go too far down that road, there's some conflicting accounts of all this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Some paint him as a hero, a visionary, others a ruthless tyrant, hungry for power. Even people who lived at the same time as him had different views.
So how do we figure out the real story? Can we even...
That's the thing about history. It's like a puzzle where we're missing pieces, and the ones we do have might be biased, incomplete. We got to be critical. Think about who wrote these accounts, what their agenda was.
So maybe there isn't one truth. It's more about acknowledging the complexity, all the contradictions.
Exactly, and that's what makes him so fascinating to study.
Okay, so we've looked at all this. Triumphs, failures, the military genius, the personal struggles. What's the takeaway?
Alexander was more than just the conqueror, that's for sure. Brilliant, ambitious, driven, but also flawed. Capable of great compassion, but prone to intense grief. A product of his time, but in some ways, ahead of it too.
His impact is still felt today. And he leaves us with a big question too. He wanted to unite the world through conquest, but that didn't work. So how do we achieve unity in a world that's still so divided?
Tough question. It's something Alexander struggled with, and we're still figuring it out. Maybe the key is understanding our shared humanity, remembering that despite our differences, cultures, backgrounds, beliefs, we're all connected.
That's a nice thought, but
Yeah.
how do we actually do that? Build bridges, not walls. Yeah, it's a really good question. Not sure there's a simple answer, but looking at figures like Alexander, how they succeeded, how they messed up, maybe we can learn something.
Definitely. And with Alexander, it's interesting. He tried to create unity in two ways, right? Military force, obviously, but also cultural exchange.
He didn't just force Greek culture onto everyone. He took on parts of Persian culture too, incorporated Persians into his army, even married Roxana, a Persian noblewoman.
Exactly. So it wasn't just about domination. He saw that for unity to really work, You need some cultural understanding, respect, integration.
And that idea of blending Greek and Eastern traditions,
Mhm.
that was pretty radical back then.
Oh, yeah, definitely ahead of his time.
And it makes you think, right, about the conflicts we see today. So much of it comes from not understanding each other, fear of what's different.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to learn about other cultures, see different points of view, get out of our comfort zones.
It's like expanding your world.
Right, and replacing fear with understanding. Like Aristotle said, knowledge is the key.
So maybe that's part of it. Encourage people to be more curious, question their own assumptions, be open to new experiences.
Definitely a good place to start. And we can all do that, right? Travel, read books, talk to people from different backgrounds.
It's like that story about Alexander and Bucephalus,
Yeah.
the wild horse. He didn't just try to overpower it.
He figured out what it was afraid of, worked with it, found a solution that worked for both of them.
Exactly. So many things that divide us come from fear, misunderstanding, lack of empathy. If we can actually see things from someone else's point of view, understand where they're coming from, that can change everything.
It really can.
So maybe Alexander's biggest legacy isn't the empire he built or the battles he won. It's the idea that for unity to work, you need understanding, empathy, being willing to see beyond your own little world.
A powerful legacy, especially today. Something for all of us to think about. How can we bring more understanding into our own lives? How can we be the ones building bridges instead of walls?
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Alexander the Great.